From the very start of the Galactic Republic, droids were the foundation of civilization. Protocol droids made day-to-day social interactions easier. Astromech droids made space travel a breeze. And assassin droids were the most efficient way to kill one's enemy. Darth Sidious and Count Dooku knew this to be a fact of life, constructing an assassin droid that could challenge even the Jedi Knights. However, this droid was different. This droid was once a sentient being, a noble warrior of the Kaleesh. Born Kimayan Jai Shila, General Grievous became the supreme commander of the Confederacy of Independent Systems. After a fatal accident initiated by Dooku himself, Shila was told that the Jedi were responsible for his injuries. Swearing vengeance against the Jedi Order, Grievous agreed to lead the Separatist army against the Republic. While most of his motivation was innate, his programming and processors inflated his hate for the Jedi and the Republic at large. His skill with a lightsaber was nearly unmatched, contending with Jedi Council members, even killing one. Over the course of the Clone Wars, Grievous became the most feared Jedi killer of the time, achieving victory after victory, a seemingly unstoppable force. But Grievous would meet his demise at the hands of Obi-Wan Kenobi. With his death, the war was officially ended, but the Republic still fell, controlled by the Sith and a new empire. One of these Sith, named Darth Vader, trained an apprentice in secret, using a droid to train his apprentice in the ways of lightsaber combat. The droid was named PROXY, a prototype holodroid who was made solely for the training purposes of the secret apprentice, Galen Merrick. The droid cataloged hundreds of psychological profiles, ranging from Sith Lords, Jedi Knights, and bounty hunters, mimicking each of their styles. For years, he turned an unassuming orphan into a weapon for Vader's schemes. Though he could never outmatch Galen in direct combat, his skill and technique were a near-perfect replication of the greatest fighters of the galaxy. As with most of my videos, I will be observing these characters at their primes. For Grievous, this would be his appearance in Revenge of the Sith. There is debate if this is his prime, since his chest was crushed by Mace Windu before the events of the movie, but that didn't seem to affect him against Obi-Wan Kenobi on Utapau. Also, as a side note, this would be an observation of Grievous in the Legends canon, with a complete disregard of his appearance in the Clone Wars CGI series, where I think he is broken, underpowered, and a completely changed character. I would go into detail about why I feel this way, but I feel I should save that for, yes, you guessed it, another Geek Rant. For PROXY, his prime is during the events of The Force Unleashed. It should also be noted that this video will be shorter than my others. PROXY does not have a lot to go off of, while Grievous has plenty. In the nature of fairness and balance, I will be tapering my analysis of Grievous. In future videos, I will be sure to do a more in-depth analysis of Grievous. But for this, I will be balancing it out with PROXY. General Grievous stood at a daunting 7 feet tall. Originally a Kaleesh warrior with a grudge against the Jedi, the general was transformed into a cyborg, far more machine than sentient. Though tall and lanky, Grievous was quite fast and agile, able to evade the force pushes of most Jedi Knights or empty a room of clone troopers in seconds. Due to the nature of PROXY's build, his height was variable, as tall as Qui-Gon Jinn and as short as Darth Maul. Though PROXY's speed varied depending on the person he mimicked, we do have some indication of how fast he could go. Based on statements made by Starkiller in the Force Unleashed novelization, PROXY's reflexes were not as astute as a Force user's. PROXY could contend with a Force user's speed, but not keep up with their intuition and reflex. General Grievous was built from an alloy of durasteel and duranium, some of the toughest material in the Star Wars mythos. The General's armor withstood being crushed by a speeder, telekinetic pushes, and kicks. His strength and his blows, both with and without the blade, were equally devastating, frequently throwing Jedi around like ragdolls. PROXY was also built from a strong and malleable alloy. As a training droid, he had to hold up to brutal punishment without having to be repaired constantly. Each of his fights with Galen ended with PROXY being stabbed, in one way or the other. For me, this speaks to a high level of resiliency. Although PROXY had high levels of constitution, his strength is never considered to be anything more above average, though he did give Boba Fett a hard time during their bout. Both General Grievous and PROXY were very durable battle droids. Their constitutions were relatively comparable, taking punishment very well. The differences lie in their combative speed. PROXY was fast, but lacked the intuition of a Force wielder, which was ultimately his overall failure. Grievous was faster. In fact, it has always been my opinion that Grievous fought so fast that he negated a Jedi's use of the Force. Because the speed of his blade work was so overwhelming, he forced Jedi to divert all their Force reserves to their physical augmentation, not their telekinesis. That is why Grievous can contend with the likes of Mace Windu or Count Dooku. But when there was a distance between him and his foe, he could be crushed. That said, I would say the General gets a speed advantage against PROXY. General Grievous gets the ultimate edge for his physical abilities. Training under Darth Tyrannus, General Grievous had a working knowledge of all lightsaber forms of Jedi combat. His programming and skills were so developed he could even contend with members of the Jedi Council. General Grievous carried several lightsabers, trophies representing each of his Jedi kills. As stated, he was highly proficient in his knowledge and application of lightsaber combat, changing styles on a dime. For this, I would attribute his style more to the dueling-oriented users of Form 6, Niman. Obviously, Grievous lacked the Force, so the integration of Force powers is out of the question. But his integration of different lightsaber movesets, for me, is most akin to Form 6. Programmed by Darth Vader, PROXY was essentially a practitioner of all lightsaber forms, with a twist. PROXY was a mimic droid, able to replicate Jedi, Sith, and even bounty hunters of the past. It is not specified how extensive PROXY's impersonations were, but I personally think that they came mostly from the Clone Wars era. It is also not specified how PROXY materialized the weapons he used. There is one explanation that his weapons were stored within his body and that Darth Vader gave him one of his lightsabers, but some of the weapons he used simply, realistically, could never fit in his body. That said, we have seen him use standard lightsabers, lightsaber pikes, lightsaber staves, and even blasters. Unlike Grievous, PROXY was not exactly proficient in all forms of lightsaber combat, per se. Instead, he was proficient in replicating specific styles. The Ataru Sarisu mix of Obi-Wan Kenobi, the Juyo Niman mix of Darth Maul. The best example of Grievous's effectiveness on the battlefield comes from his fight against Mace Windu, one of the deadliest Jedi of the time. In Labyrinth of Evil, Grievous fought Mace atop a maglev train. Even though the General was hindered by his movement on the train, he was still able to replicate Windu's Vapad style, contending with him on equal terms. This speaks volumes not only to the General's skill, but his adaptability. And Grievous was not only skilled with a lightsaber. He has displayed brutal skill with hand-to-hand combat, ripping through armor and crushing skulls. Even without a lightsaber, Grievous was very lethal, a weapon in and of himself. Unlike Grievous, PROXY could adapt to a fight with a specific style, not just a certain form. This was both limiting and beneficial. It does not seem like PROXY could merge his programs and avatars together, limited by their specific fighting styles. However, he did a great job replicating the distinct styles that made each of them famous and infamous. PROXY was also built to simulate the Force, using his repulsors to duplicate a telekinetic shove. He has also displayed an ability with hand-to-hand combat by way of his Jango Fett module. PROXY's true X-factor was his ability to adapt to any situation with near-perfect combat emulation. This round comes down to skill. Both Grievous and PROXY were able to adapt to any situation. Grievous was taught all the classical forms of lightsaber combat, and PROXY had every style logged into his programming. They both could contend with Force wielders, matching them blade to blade. I do think PROXY has a slight advantage in at least one aspect of his combative abilities. It's easy to forget that PROXY could transform into non-Force sensitives as well. At a distance, he could easily mimic Jango or Boba Fett, using blasters to keep Grievous off balance. Even while mimicking a Force sensitive, he could repel Grievous with a simulated Force push. That said, I doubt this would be very effective. Grievous was capable of shrugging off blaster bolts, only being defeated when his Duracell casing was exposed. Grievous has also displayed that he can outright evade telekinetic pushes from Jedi Knights. While these aspects of PROXY could keep him in the fight, it would not give him a definitive edge. As it is, Grievous has contended and defeated much better opponents through superior speed, agility, and training. PROXY capped out just below Galen Merrick as a duelist, simply not able to keep up with a Force sensitive's intuition. For this, the ultimate edge goes to General Grievous for his combative abilities. As stated previously, Grievous was certainly more machine than sentient. His physical transformations came with enhancements that were mostly favorable. While the memory of his past lives were altered, his physical coordination was enhanced. And though his anger and fury were inflated, his programming allowed for more retention in Jedi combat. Initially, PROXY's primary programming was to kill Galen Merrick by any means. This meant using every piece of programming and trick he had. When Starkiller was old enough to hold a lightsaber, Vader arranged a catalog of lightsaber duelists in PROXY's memory core. PROXY could call on the overwhelming offenses of Darth Maul, or the stoic defenses of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Tactically, Grievous was taught to fight with the unorthodox in mind, using 4 sabers at once, integrating his agility into the mix, mixing feet and fist in his moveset. Although he was regarded as a military genius, he was criticized for his lack of subtlety, which seeped over into his martial skill. His fight with Obi-Wan Kenobi is a chief example. Instead of heeding the words of Dooku, he approached Kenobi with blinding speed instead of artful subtlety. He tried to cut through, rather than cut around. That said, this does not affect many of the General's fights. After all, it took the greatest defensive fighter in the Jedi Order to finally bring him down. In most cases, Grievous's drive and resolve usually offset his general lack of subtlety. Offensively, PROXY only seems suited enough to train Starkiller as a functional duelist. Their sparring sessions usually lasted several minutes, but their engagements were often non-lethal. In one of their sessions, PROXY mimicked both Qui-Gon Jinn and Anakin Skywalker to great offensive effect, but still could not defeat Starkiller. His greatest offensive impersonation came from Darth Maul, but still, the result was the same. None of these avatars could break through Galen Merrick's defenses indefinitely. Even less can be said about PROXY's own defenses. Though he held up relatively well against Starkiller's assaults, when facing master-level duelists, he simply was outmatched. For me, this plays into the fact that PROXY was primarily a training droid, not an assassin. He was not battle-hardened like General Grievous, or Dirge, or even HK-47. The verdict of this round comes down to intellect. While both combatants are deadly machines, PROXY was a slave to programming. while Grievous still retained the judgment of a sentient. However, General Grievous was a little flamboyant in his combative approach. It is very likely that PROXY would combat this with a staunch defense by way of his Obi-Wan Kenobi module. But as it stands, there was one thing that PROXY lacked that Obi-Wan had: the intuition of the Force. Grievous would have defeated Obi-Wan, as he did other Jedi, had it not been for Kenobi's complete trust in the Force and his added training in Surisu. The Revenge of the Sith novelization describes that Obi-Wan's defenses were being overloaded, that no human could keep up with Grievous, but Obi-Wan didn't have to, as he was being guided by the Force. With all that said, and as stated before, PROXY and Grievous's programming and tactics with regards to combat were tantamount. But Grievous's intellect tipped in his favor. Grievous was more than perfect imitation of movement. He was unpredictable and ever-changing. General Grievous gets the edge for his programming and tactical abilities. General Grievous vs. PROXY is one of those matchups that look good at first glance, but it is very slanted the more and more one looks into it. Both combatants could do similar things, their programming was comparable and their training was the same, but there was a stark difference in the combatants they fought and the experience they held. Let's set up this fight. Let's say it takes place in the Petranaki Arena. As a final tally, I would say the advantage to the victor goes 9-10. The following is a hypothetical battle of one majority victory. Pulling from his psychological profile of Grievous, PROXY would likely transform into Obi-Wan Kenobi immediately. Much like the General's actual fight with Kenobi, he would approach with his signature spinning blade saws. Much like Kenobi, PROXY would hold off Grievous's initial assault, but Grievous would start overloading PROXY's defenses. Without the Force, it would be too much. With a stab, Grievous would jab one of his sabers through PROXY's body. PROXY would spark and spasm, but he would immediately transform into Jango Fett. With a raised arm, he would blast Grievous with a blaster. Grievous would fall back, shocked but generally unharmed, save for a smoldering hole in his armor. PROXY would start unloading on Grievous, attempting to keep him at bay with blaster fire. But the droid general would evade the shots with inhuman speed. Just before Grievous closes the distance, PROXY would transform into Starkiller, throwing out a strong wave of air with his repulsors. Grievous would not be thrown back, as PROXY's use of repulsors were not nearly as strong as a real Jedi, but the droid general would slow. It's long enough for PROXY to transform into Darth Maul, pressing his own offensive advantage. He may even catch Grievous off guard with a Juyo Flurry utilized with a saber staff. But just as Starkiller stated, PROXY was nothing like the real thing. Grievous would adapt to Maul's style, turning the fight to his own favor, using his extra blades to turn his defense into counterattack. Before long, it would be the general that would hold the advantage. After a short amount of time, Grievous would break PROXY's guard, slicing him in two at the torso and the thighs. And thus, I declare General Grievous, the droid general, the most feared Jedi killer of the Clone Wars, the victor. Of course, this is all my opinion. Do you agree that Grievous would take the majority, or do you believe PROXY stood more of a chance? Please leave your thoughts and comments below, and as always, peace, love, and may the Force be with you. Always.
This was the dark side of the Force. It was pure, and it was powerful. Unlimited.
No, why are you mowing your lawn right now? I'm recording a Let's Play.
Grievous would jab. Grievous would drab. Oh my god. Grievous would drab. Oh my god. Grievous would jab. Grievous would drab. Grievous would drab one of his. I think I already got it, but Grievous would jab one of his sabers through Proxy's body.